Good morning, everyone. So, today we are going to talk a little bit about fixing a fixed problem or something along those lines. So, let's get into it. So, today I was reading through my comments, and one of my subscribers had posed a question around an issue that he was facing at work. Now, basically, the discussion here was how to deal with internationalization and things of that nature. And the problem was described to me in this manner that at this person's company, basically, they had a solution where all of the translations were static files served by a CDN. And then basically the application itself made a request to the CDN to get the translations, and everything was processed client side. And so he mentioned something that I think is very interesting, where he explained that one of the issues with this approach is that now there's a separation between the translations and the JavaScript. Now, the impact of this is basically that when you are developing your code, you have to be very sure that you are grabbing the right key value, that you're spelling the key of the translation that you're after correctly, because you don't have a way of verifying it. So when you're shipping something to production, you have to make sure that there's a match between your application and the file on the CDN. And he expressed this idea that he wanted to have some type of connection. He wanted to be more certain that they didn't ship something that was broken, basically. And he asked for my input. And this is a great question, because I've had my bouts and my experience. I have quite a bit of experience working with this sort of issue. And so I suggested to him that, from my perspective, we have to consider there's no definitive answer here, because this is a trade-off situation. In order for you to be able to effectively know and have a connection between the code and your translations, you have to bundle that with your JavaScript. Now, I can absolutely think of situations where you can do this, like where you can kind of add some extra layers of validation without having to have your static assets as part of the code base. I mean, in theory, you could create a script that simply went to the endpoint as a part of your build and then grabbed all the translations and diffed the file system against those translations. But then you get the problem, are you sure that the place where you are using a given key is the intended situation to use that key? Are you sure that, there's all kinds of issues where you're still not 100% sure that you're grabbing the right keys. It's better, but it gets to be a little bit more complicated. And so the suggestion that I made to him was basically this, that instead of trying to create a situation where you can at no point push something to production that is not broken, consider the cost-value ratio. Because if you think about it, the benefits of having a decoupled translation process from the software, from the code itself, is very high, because it means that if you need to change the translation, or you need to do translations, because translations are tricky, you don't want your translations to be depending on your developers, because that is going to add a lot of overhead process to the development team. And so having it decoupled is actually a very, very good thing. Now, as I said, that means that you don't have that connection right. So this is unfortunately one of those situations where you can't really have your cake and eat it at the same time. However, I've suggested that just having a function in your JavaScript that tries to access the value that holds the translation, and if it finds the value, it returns it. If it doesn't find the value, it simply uses your log, because you have most likely some type of logging system. It logs out that there's a missing value to your error tracking system. And because you have a decoupled translation process, that log is going to basically give you a notification the first time a user sees an untranslated piece of text on your page, and then you are going to fix it within minutes of the first user encountering that error. Said and done. My subscriber actually got back to me, and he explained that, that's kind of what we're doing already. And my CTO is telling me that this is a fixed problem, but I still am not satisfied. And when he said that, I had this moment of an epiphany, if you will. And I thought back to the days where I used to have this attitude where good enough is not good enough. Like, it has to be perfect. And I can only... you know, when you get to a certain age and you think back on, and you talk to younger kids. I'm not talking about this specific user, just in general now. And you hear their thought process and you kind of think back to the days when you were their age, and you kind of go, how must I have been to deal with back in those days? My poor parents. Not the exact same thing in this scenario, but I can think back on all the times I've had this discussion with more senior coworkers back in when I was more junior than I am today. And this is how it must have felt. Because if you consider this, now I am absolutely on board. Like, if we could solve this in a perfect manner and we could have our cake and eat it at the same time, which we can. I mean, as I said, we can in theory add more and more energy and more process, and we could solve this problem with a lot of extra work and a lot of complexity. But consider the impact of this. The solution that we have now is literally, like, the impact of having an issue with the translation is so small. Like, it's a single piece of text that is missing, and you will be notified immediately when it happens, and most likely fix it before it happens to more than one user. If you consider that, if you weigh that against everything else, I mean, don't you have more important things to work on than solving this issue? Because a bug that is that small is almost a nothing problem in the IT world. Like, there are bugs that will impact hundreds of users, if not thousands. And this bug will affect one user, most likely once, before you fix it within minutes. And you don't even need developers to fix it, most likely. You simply need to make a change in the CDN. So what I will argue that this person is trying to do is to over-optimize. He's trying to create a perfect solution with very little value. Because there's very little benefit in the cost-value ratio is off. He's going to have to invest quite a lot of time. He was talking about creating a Babel plugin and all these other fancy techniques. The work that he's going to put into fixing this problem is actually going to be much higher than simply having the solution that they have today. So when it comes to and that's kind of what I want you to take away from this, guys. You always have to make a cost-benefit analysis. Remember, there is no system that has no bugs. Every single system has bugs, which means that you have to accept that it can't be solved. So the question is, do you invest a lot of energy and time for something that is very low value and low impact, or do you spend your time trying to solve problems that actually have a large impact on your product and your users? Now, this is my personal opinion. I think that I kind of have to agree with this person's CTO that this is, in my opinion, a fairly solved problem. And personally, I wouldn't spend much more time trying to fix it unless it turns out that you have a really major issue with pushing untranslated stuff to production. If that is the case, then maybe you have to have a rethink and do what I said. Just have a static analysis tool of some sort that just makes an attempt to make sure that all the keys and the values are actually there at build time. But honestly, guys, perfect is the enemy of the good. And this is in my opinion, this was a very good solution to a problem where there's no perfect solution. Have a great day.